Subjective standards. We hold what we value to high standards, what we pity to low, what we control to ours, and what we fear to none. So thank you for listening. This is something that I thought of while I was editing this video about how the media and others are covering the Chinese Communist Party's reaction to this current pandemic that we're going through as I record this, versus how this is specifically to the United States media and people in the United States of America, and I think the Western world in general, which I do live in and have at least westernized world and have more experience with. But anyway, just to see what the CCP is treated like versus what Donald Trump and his administration and other people involved in the Western world are treated like. It was part of the Shorties series like this, where I take short condensed ideas, post on social media, and then I expand on them in video form. And in that one, I had talked about two separate things. I was talking about how would it make sense to say that you believe China has actually controlled it, the Chinese Communist Party has actually controlled the virus outbreak in Wuhan, you're quoting the actual numbers, without putting a caveat and saying, oh, we're not quite sure about these numbers. So if they're just accepting the numbers for what they are, then they must think that, hey, they've somehow actually done a good job of actually stopping this and preventing this. And then why are they not going forward and asking, like, if you know how to control this, CCP, how come you haven't told the rest of the world exactly how you did it so we can actually get figures? How come you haven't actually told us this is how we've been managing the symptoms and healing the people who actually come down with it versus just saying nobody has it? So that's a kind of a suspicious thing that I thought of. But then some of you might think, like, wait there, Silas. What are you talking about? People actually hold things to high standards? You holding someone like Trump to high standards? No, people dislike Trump. People say Trump is an idiot. But no, one thing you have to realize that I realized some time back that made a lot more sense to me. He's not their president. He is their father. The state is a father figure to them. They've been raised by the state. A lot of the people with public schools, with a lot of welfare systems in the West, they have been raised by their states. The state comes onto that parental figure. So the president is that mother, is that father, is that leader in that sense. And then you take this further. As a child, your parent is your God. And this actually continues into adulthood for some people. They project that onto the state. The state becomes a godhead, a figure of this system that's supposed to control things in ways that no human being, no individual human being, especially you, can do. That is why you're ceding your agency. That is why you're saying, I am not able to do this. I will give this power to you via the vote or things like that. And that voting part is even bigger in the West because it's somebody conceding, saying, oh, I've actually been sold this idea. I am conceding. I am seeing your actual worth and putting it onto you and saying, you can do this thing for me now. And the expectations they have are massive, are huge. For a more practical example of this, look at how some Catholics look at what the Pope says. Then look at what a Protestant thinks about what the Pope says. Then now think about what a Muslim or a Jewish person might think about what the Pope says. Now think about what an atheist might think about what the Pope says. Now each one of these groups has a different relationship and expectation of how they value Christianity and in specific Catholicism. They all recognize that the Pope is ostensibly a representative of specifically Catholicism that is said to be the vicar of Christ. So depending on the valuation of that supposed truth claim to you, you're going to be a lot more critical about what the Pope says and does, because your expectations for that actual position are already quite high. So your standards for what he says and does will be much higher than, for example, a mullah from a Muslim country or some rabbi from some synagogue somewhere in Israel. You're not going to hold what they say to the same amount. Then, of course, with the Abrahamic religions, in general, they will have a higher value for the declarations of anyone saying, this is God's insight. So now moving on to the whole pity situation. With some people in the West, some of the people who are detracting Trump very highly and seem to be rather quiet to the CCP, I think it's similar to just how when people in the media cover religions that they don't believe in, they don't necessarily hold them to higher standards. They just say, oh, this person said this person said that. Doesn't mean they necessarily believe this. They don't necessarily mean that that God that they don't believe in literally told that person whose power they don't really accept on earth that this is the truth about this thing. They can just report that. That's how they're doing it to the CCP. Some of them don't really believe the CCP is a system that can actually do that. They might truly believe personally that it's a lie, but they're just reporting the actual information. They're like, yeah, these people, we don't necessarily pity them per se, but they have a higher valuation of their system of a democracy or where they live, of the West, wherever they may be, to the Chinese people and say, unfortunately, these people are already in a situation where they don't have the system that we have. They don't believe in what we believe in. They haven't been privy to the sort of expectations and value that we have. So we kind of pity them in that sense, and this is just part of that negative thing. So I'm not going to hold you to that high standards. I expect these lies from you, so I'm just going to be like, yeah, that's just how bad it is. We almost look at them as people who are just lacking something very important as is, and that can bring some pity. We just have a system where somebody's hurt or injured, they just harmed, they're living in a sort of existence of scarcity of something that we consider to be very central, so we can kind of understand why they wouldn't achieve this much. For example, you see this with people looking at the black communities and say, look, these are people who are just crippled. They're just being crippled by society, and we should feel bad for them. We shouldn't expect them to achieve the similar things that we hold other people to. And I said in a separate shorty, I was talking about how one of the only privileges that actually exists for white, specifically white males, is consequences. Is you value them, their ability so high that you're actually saying you actually have to actually achieve what you do, and if you fail at this, you'll be held responsible for it. And then that raises the stakes for the people who actually succeed in that field to know that if I fail here, I could not get a second chance, so I have to do it as good as possible. Now I'm going to transition here to the whole what we control, we hold to our standards. I'm going to bring parenting into this. I've talked about a bit with the whole minority groups, blacks, African Americans in the United States of America. And there is an infantilization of certain identity politics groups that are breaking up and saying, no, you have to come to us. We're the ones who actually own your vote, and we'll be the ones who actually be able to help you do these things. They engender this sense of dependency on the people. They control them, and then they say, okay, you have to vote like we do. We're going to hold you to standards that we have. You take a situation of parents. In many cases, you as a parent will hold your kids to standards that you set. Now, depending on what you value about your child's life and mental state and things like this, it's going to change the standards that you hold. Somebody might value safety in a certain way and comfort, where they coddle the kid and they just focus on, okay, this kid can't fail, this kid has to be happy all the time, and that's the thing that we're going to hold to a higher standard. And we're going to define that comfort in how we define the comfort instead of trying to identify what is the child's actual comfort level. Oh, it's comfortable for me as a kid if I had more actual resources, more toys and more trips and more space in the house and all these things. So as a parent, you're going to be like, I'm going to work hard as possible to provide these things for my kid. Yet at the same point, you might be devaluing the challenges that you had or somebody can experience by going out there and failing and having struggles and trying things. You may look back at your past and say those things were things that made you struggle. Those were things that you felt pity for. You felt that people were pitying you for these things. And then you get to a situation where your kid doesn't go through those things, and then they actually have less ability to actually adjust to the challenges that occur in life when they actually face them on their own. Oh, I played in a team that kept losing and it was horrible. I saw that other team winning. I wanted that to win. So I'm going to take my kid to a school where there's participation trophies. Everybody wins, and I think that's good. But it turns out not being that good for your kid. You associate loss in competition as something pitiful, and then you hold that to a low standard of evaluation in somebody's life. And then it turns out that there are actually some positives of that. You hold winning as to be the highest standard, to be something that just is glorified. And then you think, wrongfully in this situation, that it's simply appearing to have won that was enough. And this could just be in part because you actually didn't have the experience of what it took to actually win, or have the abilities that you just don't really have an understanding of it. So there's a double-sided thing with this. I'm not blaming anyone outright for this situation, just trying to discuss it. So somebody might have a different valuation of what winning is and think just appearing like winning is, you hold that to a higher standard, then that ends up being a mess up for everything involved. So that's how it goes with teams, families, businesses, congregations, corporations, governments, whatever you have control of. It makes sense that you would apply your standards onto this thing and say, we're holding ourselves to these standards. It's hard for you to control the standards of things that you don't. Sometimes completely practically, you just can't really put your standards on there because the structure there isn't there for them to actually appreciate your standards. And we see these on an international scale. How do you actually go and convince other people that your standards might result in a better quality of life than theirs? There's different ways to show this to people. Sometimes it's the communication. People just look at other countries and say, why is that country so successful? Why are those people living like they live? But they're not putting a right estimation on what it takes to maintain that sort of life. Some people are born into certain lives. I think a lot of Americans are born into just a land of milk and honey and just plenty, a post resource scarcity environment where they just take certain things for granted. They don't understand what it takes to actually have achieved these things and how different that is from the rest of the world. But this comes from a long time of being able to actually control certain things, get control of nature to the point where you can actually hold it to the standards. You hold it to the human standard and say, we are shaping the elements that exist in nature to the benefit of the humans in this area. And that is part of the success of the United States of America. Now, talking about this shaping of humans, there's another thing related with the United States of America and other places with imperialism. This is part of what states run on, this whole fear. They have the monopoly of violence over a given area. They have the big militaries. They have their borders. They have this pressure on the people that live within and the people that live without, that implicit threat. Where does this come from? This is something that is in human nature. It existed before states, and I think religions are the best examples of this. That term, God-fearing. I am a God-fearing person. But then you look at the standards most people hold their fellow humans to versus the standards that they hold their gods to. When their gods actually do things, there's almost no standards. Oh, the god is powerful enough to do whatever they want, so I'm not going to question them. Who am I to question the god? Who am I to judge you? And that's what a standard is. A standard is a judgment. A standard is looking at something and saying, this person needs to do better. This thing needs to be better than it is. And this goes back to some of the things that I was talking about in the past. Some people have a fear of their kid. They fear their children not liking them. So they're like, I'm not going to hold them to any standards. I'm not going to let them actually go through these difficulties. I'm not going to let them win and lose on their actual position. So I fear that from them. I'm not going to talk to them. Or I fear the person I'm dating. So I'm not going to ask them why they're doing what they're doing. I fear them leaving me alone. I fear being alone. So I'm not going to hold them to an actual standard and say, I deserve more. I want to be heard. I want to be actually a participant in this relationship. So they'll just take whatever is given and just accept that. In some cases, people fear certain minority groups. I think in general, men have a certain fear of women. This could come from a whole thing with the childhood. There's just a general knowledge that, hey, your parents are gods. Everyone has a mother, like a lot of feminists and people like to say. Yes, they do. And I think you have an awareness that you were in this female body and you came out of it, and that was your initial God. There is a background thing with that, I think, that runs the gynocentrism, and also just a general awareness that we have in society that, hey, if you don't protect the women, your society's gone because they are the controlling aspect of human reproduction. This is just something that I think life forms have in their biology. So there is an aspect of fear and reverence there that exists. The whole Mother Earth thing, there's a certain fear that if we don't do this, the Earth is going to wipe us away. It's not just a flip of a coin, simple reason that the Mother Earth itself is normally actually used in that female wording, that female nature, that source of life type of thing. There is a reverence and fear of that. I brought you into this world, I can take you out. I am the world that you're a part of. You could no longer be a part of this. Now, expanding onto China, with some of the people, it's just a practical thing that people are just afraid of losing their jobs for very good reasons. They're afraid of losing the way they earn a living for many reasons. And that's why some people are protesting to go back out, despite the risks that might be there with the virus. For some people, talking about this in a certain way can directly affect how much money they earn, can affect whether they make a living. There's a practical sense of just China having invested in a lot of things, and then there's also the connected one where there's some people who will just chuck out the word racist, and then you get tied with racist, and that can directly affect how much you're able to earn in the future. Oh, you were unsensitive about this group, and it's a weapon some of them were in charge or part of the whole forging of, so I'm not necessarily too hurt in seeing it being used against them. I don't want to say it's completely schadenfreude, but it's not. Isn't it ironic? Don't you think? No, I don't know if it's ironic. It's just bad. It's sad. It's a mess. I almost pity them, and I think with that pity, I actually do think I do find myself holding some of these media to already low standards already. Maybe I should hold them higher standards, but I just don't really think what they're doing is a pleasant situation. I look at many of them and they look like they're having a bad time. You look at what Chris Cuomo has been doing from CNN, and he doesn't look like a happy individual. He looks like somebody who's struggling through something. He even come out and said he doesn't enjoy what he does. He feels unaccomplished. You look at someone like Rachel Maddow, and she seems to be crying a lot, and I don't think it's just a put on. Somebody like Brian Stelter from CNN came out and said the president made him cry, and he feels like reporters should feel these emotions. Like, these are pitiful people in many ways, and I think with them being pitiful, I have very low standards of expectations of the content that they actually get from them. I am not surprised that they treat China this way. What I am surprised for is how many people treat different people in their lives to these different levels of standards. I think you should hold yourself to the highest of standards. Get to understand who you are, hold yourself to those higher standards, and then that will actually have a knock on effect on other things. The friends that you have, what you eat, what you listen to, what you intake, you hold your body and your existence to that higher standard, and those other things will also follow. When you have pity for yourself and very low self confidence, chances are you hold yourself to very low standards, you expect very little for you. And when you control yourself physically, your feelings, your environment, you're able to establish your standards. And those standards, if you value yourself, will be high standards that you hold around you. And as for what we fear, holding them to no standards, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's about what you fear. It's about, do you actually have a good reason to fear that thing? Once you establish that, it's good to actually hold them to no standards, because that thing you fear, if it's for a good reason, don't expect something better out of it. Be wary of that thing and be able to actually treat and attack it. If there's something that could harm you and you rightfully should feel fear for it, don't expect it to have any concern for you. So hold it to those standards where anything is possible from this thing and act accordingly. So that's it for this video. It's part of the Shorty series. This is a shorty that came from two other shorties. So that's kind of a new in this shorty series. But like if you liked what I was talking about, dislike if you disliked. Thanks for spending the time either way. Let me know what you think in the comment section. If you're on YouTube or BitChute, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. There's also links to the merchandise store with different things. I think I'll start posting some of these sayings as just words and just things, just complete text shirts on them, and other kinds of merchandise. There's also links to PayPal for one-time donations if you see fit to kind of help me out there. It'd be much appreciated. Until next time, I'll hope to keep the standards of this content to a level that's good enough, while enough for you guys to spend standards that you might have for